Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
And welcome back to yet another week of Non-Ordinary Mind with Dr. Me and Dr. You. What are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about MK Ultra and Monarch programming.
That's right.
It's a, when you dive into this material, it'll just grow hair on your hands, make you crazy.
It's dark.
It's very dark. You know what I thought of that I hadn't gotten a chance to talk to you about? Did anybody who's seen the Jason Bourne movies, the Bourne Ultimatum, that's MK Ultra. That's what it's about.
I fell asleep during that, so it must have worked.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they were fun. I liked them. But maybe, just like Matt Damon, perhaps. I don't know.
I like him too. He's a heartthrob. Why don't you kick us off with our mental wealth tip of the week?
Okay,
I'm feeling poor.
Here's some mental wealth for everybody out there. It was never your job to fix, save, or rescue your parents.
It's their responsibility.
Well, I guess, we take care of kids and old people when they're feeble, but, as kids, we somehow think we have to rescue our parents, and it goes through life that way. And it was a big topic in my therapy training, about my tendency to want to do that. So I try not to do that anymore. Rescue and helping are two really different things. So we could talk for a whole hour on that, and maybe we want to talk about MK Ultra.
Yeah, this is some deep, dark labyrinth. I don't even want to call this a rabbit hole.
I think it's that's a pretty good one, actually.
It goes deep, and I mean, for our younger viewers, I guess, who don't really know much about this, or maybe they heard a little bit about this on the internets or wherever else they communicate this type of information to you. It was a code name. MK Ultra was a code name given to a program of experiments on human subjects, right? They were designed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agencies, the CIA, and it was super secretive at the time.
Well, it was so secretive that they tried to destroy all the files.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll get to that. But, the whole, well, what's interesting is I'm always like, MK Ultra. What does this MK stand for? MK apparently is a digraph, meaning the project was sponsored by the agency's technical services staff, TSS, which is kind of like, I don't know, like the SS equivalent, maybe.
Oh, absolutely.
Super secret. And then ultra was I guess a pronoun word that was used to designate the toppest of the top secret. So instead of top secret, it's ultra secret. So that's where the word MK Ultra and the meaning came from. Although it went by other cryptonyms like Project MK Naomi or MK Delta, or I think they had at least the drug-related experiments were called Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a typo. It's just Project Artichoke.
Good one.
Thanks. I'll be here all week, and the week's over. What's interesting? I kind of defer to you on the authority on this because you were alive through a lot of this,
barely alive.
And you've done a lot more research on this over a longer period of time as information came out, which I think is really kind of fascinating.
Well, I kind of bumped into it. I didn't intend to know as much as I do about it. When I dealt with my first, at the time was called multiple personality disorder patient, which was around 1990. I mean, I might have dealt with them without knowing it earlier, but the first one I was aware of, I started digging into everything I could find about it. And I ran into this stuff from the Church Committee of the United States Congress, And that's where MK Ultra was brought to public attention. That was 1975. And then you start looking at this stuff, and the scope is humongous. 80 institutions, including colleges, universities, hospitals, prisons, and of course, pharmaceutical companies. And the CIA operated using these as front organizations. And the CEOs may have known it. There we go. Everybody get some alt psych stuff. And then, they would use psychoanalytic drugs, paralytics, electroshock therapy, hypnosis. Sometimes the subjects knew they were participating in a study. More often than not, they did not know.
Which makes me think of the Tuskegee experiments and some of the other awful things humans have done in this country in the 20th century, which we would like to forget about.
Well, people wonder why I'm so cynical about things. And, because I ran into this stuff. I wasn't looking for it. It found me. And when, you don't want to believe that our leaders, our government, the industries that kind of are the infrastructure of our country don't have our best interests at heart. When you start reading this stuff, and you read about the attempts to cover it up, it really boggles the mind. It absolutely boggles the mind.
Well, wouldn't you agree that for like someone my age or younger, you really have to start from a reference point of what was going on in the world? Because I think so much of why this happened was heavily influenced by Cold War stuff. I mean, conflict with the Soviets, the Chinese, North Korean, had US prisoners during the Korean War that got sent back, and we were convinced that they had figured out how to brainwash or through other techniques of psychological torture were literally achieving seemingly impossible outcomes on these people. And the US felt like they were behind, right? Like this was like a space race type of thing, except it was a race to control and erase minds, erase minds.
Absolutely. And my own personal experience with this, I studied hypnotics, and one of my teachers was, at want for a better word, a spy. And he was pretty far up the food chain, I found out after he died. He couldn't tell us while he was alive, but that's a whole other story.
Was his name
Bottom,
Sidney Gottlieb?
no,
Oh.
not quite that far up the food chain. Anyway, I bumped into this hypnotic technique that I had never heard of before, and I called him up, and he was really a master hypnotist. And I called him, I said, "Have you ever heard of this?" His response was, "Not on the phone, Rich." Anyway, he lived in Naples, and he said, "Next weekend, come down and see me, and I'll talk to you about it." He had always been incredibly supportive of me both as a person and a professional. When I got there, I met the icy naval commander spy, and he grilled me about this technique that I had just stumbled upon. Basically, he said, "Have you ever seen the movie Manchurian Candidate?" Which is what you're talking about the creation of assassins, basically, using mind control. And I said, "Yeah, I did, but it's just a movie." And he unloaded on me. He goes, "That really happened. And it was with that stuff that you're playing with now. People are going to die." I said, "Hey, no spies. Nobody's dying. I'm trying to figure out what this means." Now, it was fascinating. He grilled me for about an hour on this. And I literally was expecting, "Where were you on the night of the 24th?" It was that kind of questioning. At the end of about an hour, he just shook his head and he said, "There's 1,000 people in this world using this technique for evil and one trying to use it for good." But he did say that it was a combination of drugs and the hypnosis that could create this, that just straight hypnosis could not. Excuse me. Anyway, from a practical point of view, most people couldn't get that deep. So I gave up the technique because I don't really care about programming assassins. I was caring about breaking programming that people had. But the thing that's so ironic about the truth that you spoke about the Cold War, these were techniques developed in Nazi concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Dr. Mengele kind of stuff. And
Yeah, and the worst is after the war, we returned not only to the Nazis, like as part of Project Paperclip, but we returned to the Nazi homeland. Some of these experiments were being done not far from former concentration camps. So it's eerie, it's dark, and it's shameful for society to not recall this, be aware of this. I mean, I give people a hard time for not remembering Ruby Ridge, because that was a big shift in the way that the FBI and the NSA do their thing, protocols and procedures. But that was a much smaller event, This was massive. This was big. This really kind of changed everything. This was bigger, far bigger, if not arguably the biggest Tuskegee-like experiment, certainly in America. And it was so secret. I mean, it started in 1953, I think, ran for a good 10 years. I think they reduced the scope around 1964, further curtailed it in 1967. By 1973, it was officially halted. And unfortunately, and this is, I think, what adds all of the mystique, an attempt to destroy all of these records, either by the order of the CIA director at that time, which was a guy named Alan Dulles, right, for Dulles Airport, the airport's named after. But some people actually say this was Sidney Gottlieb, who we were talking about before, who seems quite evil. But I did a lot of digging on this man too, because he was arguably evil, but also kind of complex. I think his initial intention was to look at both therapeutic and, let's just say, non-therapeutic applications of this. And he teamed up with this British psychiatrist, Dr. Donald Cameron,
right.
who was the creator of this psychic driving concept, which was what the CIA was really looking for. Like, whoa, this guy's trying to do something with the same mechanism that we're interested in. Now, the sad thing is Cameron was,
he was a big shot.
He was a big shot. I think he later became the president of the AMA and all that. He was looking at a way to drive out the mind of a schizophrenic because it's broken, right? That was their thinking at that time, and replace it with a healthier mind, essentially like a mind transplant, which seems preposterous. And this was only 70 years ago, but there is some altruism in there. It is he was thinking, oh, how can we help schizophrenics? That was the intent. That was the goal. What he didn't know he was getting ensnared into initially was the clandestine CIA work and the work by Gottlieb, which really took a dark turn, because when he got the green light and funding, like I said, they were doing these experiments all around the world. Cameron figured out that, hey, they're not here to correct schizophrenia and erase existing memories and reprogram the psyche and make these people better people. They're looking for expendables. I mean, that was their word.
Well, and they were experimenting on people who couldn't fight back.
The expendables,
mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, sex workers,
prisoners of war,
they
captured,
and
enemy agents, spies.
Anything that's done without informed consent, to me is suspect.
Yeah, and it was most certainly not informed consent.
I mean, think about it. They gave LSD to a mental patient in Kentucky for 174 days in a row. This is
see if it would permanently ruin his mind.
Right out of Nazi Germany.
Sid Barrett style.
They also gave LSD to their own employees, to military personnel, doctors, government agents, and members of the general public, once again, with or without their knowledge and consent. This goes completely contrary to the Nuremberg Code, which the United States had agreed to follow after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And we made a lot of publicity at us saying how awful, Nazi Germany was, and of course they were. But a lot of the stuff that we were doing is right down that sort of philosophical highway.
And we recruited the very people, the very
Absolutely.
Nazis that were doing this to come over here and do it for us. That part turns my stomach. When you think about all of the patients that got forced ECT, not therapeutic ECT at 30 to 40 times the normal power to try to drive out the former inhabitant of that body and mind. They had those football helmets they'd strap on so they couldn't get them off and just play blaring rock music or do sensory deprivation or tape loops on simple noises or distressing noises, sometimes repetitive statements, which is where you start getting into the mind control.
Well,
And
you said something important. You said
I
that
did.
they ended the program basically in '64 and then, backed off over time. There's more subtle forms of mind control that they did engage in. There you go. There's a Project Mockingbird
Mm-hmm.
that the CIA basically bought off journalists and had them put in articles, music, TV shows that were more of a soft mind control than these are hard mind control techniques. We get somebody, we strap them in, we give them drugs. I mean, there's a list of things that they were trying to do that is just mind blowing. We think we are an evolved culture. Um, you know, they were trying to promote illogical thinking, impulsiveness to the point where the individual will be discredited in public. They
Mm-hmm.
wanted to increase efficiency of mentation, perception, counteract alcohol, or promote the intoxicating effects of alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they would want to use it to produce signs and symptoms of recognizable diseases, um, make hypnosis easier. That's what my friend told me, that you give them drugs and you could manipulate people. Unbelievable. You see, I always thought that hypnosis, you couldn't get somebody to do something that they were morally uh, opposed to, but he said with drugs you could do it, and that's how they did it. um, Producing amnesia, shock, confusion, physical disablement such as paralysis, which we see in conversion kind of
Mm-hmm.
reactions in patients.
They'd
Uh,
also get amnesia, urinary incontinence, a lot of times forget how to talk, maybe forget their parents or thinking that the interrogators were their parents. They literally were scrambling these brains.
you know, in the end, there's a lot of questions that were not answered because the files were deleted. But
Not
I
all
really,
of them.
yeah, that's true.
I,
Somebody messed up and they put it in some kind of other database, which they found.
yeah.
You wonder how that happened with all this wonderful stuff going on. But I mean, sinisterly wonderful, I guess. There was a case, this man named Frank Olson that we've talked
Oh,
about,
yeah. This is a good one.
and who was a CIA operative and was involved in these projects, but apparently had a major pang of guilt and was arguing about the morality of the things that they were doing. So essentially, they gave him a bunch of LSD, and he wound up going out a
Without his
window
knowledge.
without his knowledge, and he wound up going out a window. They said it was suicide. His family sued years later. Maybe, I think it was not until he died in '53, I think it
Yeah,
was.
somewhere around there.
His family sued and finally won. It wasn't until like the 1990s, I think, that they won
1994.
that they won the case.
Yeah, you know how
Um,
they won the case.
no, I don't. How did they win the case?
They exhumed. Well, let me back up. So Olson took, unknowingly took high doses of LSD. It was approximately 8 days prior to the onset of the experiment, and he actually was staying in this hotel with a member of the experiment who was an observer, who was sleeping in the same room with the guy and everything. And the report was, in the middle of the night, this guy, pitch black, got up. I don't remember if he was naked or at his jammies, but he, stumbled through the pitch black, went through window shades, and plowed out 13 stories to his death. Well, the family got his body exhumed in 1994 finally, and what they found was he had cranial injuries that indicated he had been knocked unconscious before he exited the window. So it was later determined to be a homicide. I don't remember if it was Gerald Ford. Somebody eventually pardoned the whole thing and gave him like $100 million.
I don't think it was
all that.
More like $100 than 100 million. I think it was
in the 90s.
It was 750,000, I think. But the
Maybe
bottom line is they actually brought the family in. This is going to sound really insane, and apologized. They apologized. The president of the United States. I guess we don't hear much of that nowadays.
Well, especially on a clandestine program.
Yeah. Well, we have to think about, is this the country that we want to live in? And does it really protect anyone? There was a movie called The Men Who Stare at Goats.
Mm.
And I think some of these movies have revealed pieces of this. The Men Who Stare at Goats was, people being given LSD and mind control, soldiers being given LSD mind control techniques. And, as we looked into this week's podcast, I know you and I talked about including Project Monarch along with MK Ultra, and there's no doubt that there is a Project Monarch. But as I started looking into it, it was all under MK Ultra.
Or the Manchurian Candidate is.
But interestingly enough, the idea was that the monarch, the butterfly, became the trigger for activating these things, these kinds of mental control events. And it gets pretty scary and, not completely documented, except lots and lots of anecdotal stuff. The main thing that I found is when I've worked with dissociative identity disorder patients, there was one I had that basically described this stuff. I mean, it was uncanny. But the rest of them describe parts of it, emotional torture, and that there are people who are really good hypnotic subjects, or people who are empaths who might be identified as kids that they could use to program in a certain way. Now, where are we? Are we in a science fiction novel? Maybe.
A lot of people think Ted Kaczynski was programmed.
Yeah, that's right.
Unabomber.
And what wound up happening when I started looking at the Monarch programming,
because he was involved in the experiments.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Right. As was, by the way, Allen Ginsberg, the poet.
Ginsberg was.
Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And in fact, I worked at that hospital where, in California, in Menlo Park, during my internship. And also Robert Hunter, the lyricist for the Grateful Dead.
Yep.
And I'm sure there are many, many others that were involved in that. In fact, Kesey said the best LSD he ever got was from the U.S. government.
Yeah.
So whatever
it's because the U.S. government bought all of the LSD on the planet to try to keep it out of Soviet hands. But and I had to dig deep for this. What a lot of people don't know about Gottlieb is he loved LSD. He had done LSD about 200 times before even approaching the government about this new application. And what stuns me about that is most people don't have LSD experiences and then come out of it spiritually devoid. They turn into Ram Dass. They turn into, like you said, Ken Kesey. it expands their mind or makes them more cognizant of doing no harm at the very least. And yet this guy goes straight into one of the worst experiments in American history. It puzzles
Well,
me.
well, once again, um, I think Ram Dass was on that road already. He was actually a psychologist at Harvard, and Tim Leary was working on actually. Tim Leary had a interpersonal. He worked on interpersonal psychology. Developed a test that was actually fantastic before he got into LSD. Who knows? You know, are there people who are looking to go to Disneyland with the drug? Are they looking for just having some fun, or uh, who knows what the motivation is? And the other thing is, a lot of times the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So let's say this one of these guys like Cameron or Gottlieb, they started by wanting to understand the mysteries of human consciousness, and certainly psychedelics will give you a certain experience you really can't get without about 25 years of meditation and yoga, and prayer. So who knows where they actually started? But there's the idea of power. These techniques have great power, and this is why I think I love Star Wars so much. That there's a dark side to power.
Hmm.
It's about how you wish to use it. Do you wish to receive the power in order to share, or do you wish to receive to control for yourself?
With
Now,
great power.
these guys may have been paranoid that the Russians were going to.
Well, everyone was. Everyone was.
It was all crap, by the way. The Russians were paranoid of us. We were paranoid of them.
Much like the space race, yeah, or
Yeah,
Sputnik.
yeah. And in the end, it became about power, money, funding the military, um, and sending the nation down a certain road. And you start going down this rabbit hole, you get all kinds of things. You get um, the new Phoenix program, all these assassinations in Vietnam, the My Lai incident. I mean, it's pretty scary how this opened, and we tend to think of ourselves as the good guys.
Right.
You read this stuff, you won't agree. Um,
Well, when it originally started, let's assume it had good intentions. Let's assume that Gottlieb did a bunch of acid and said, "Hey, this is great. We should use this as a medicine or therapeutic potential." At some point, when he gets hooked up with the CIA and these mind control experiments started, they probably started lighter. Like, let's see if we can push out schizophrenic aspects of it. And then it was a lot of this was either above the table enough that someone at these large companies knew it was CIA funded. And then places like Kentucky or New York. Matter of fact, I think Gottlieb is originally from Brooklyn, but they just kept going down darker and darker and darker. I mean, Cameron was driving across the border into Canada every day for work, in the psych hospital, which I'm blanking on the name of it. You probably know it, the Allen something,
oh, William Allenson White,
maybe. And
the one in Washington, you mean?
but then after the war, now all these secret black sites all over the world, whether that's Japan, Germany, and the Philippines, are being used for these experiments because they're secret black site detention centers, so the U.S. could avoid criminal prosecution. And they experimented out of the crap out of these people. And there's all those documents were destroyed. No one knows how many people were killed. Um, but a lot of that was in cooperation, especially with the former enemy of Germany, right there, not far from the concentration camps themselves. That was a level of disturbing that bothered me even more than paperclip, because paperclip, we could say, well, these guys didn't really want to be Nazis. They were scientists first, so they wanted to be scientists over here at the US, and they did do great things. So, and even that's extremely controversial. But it's not as bad as like Cameron ended up sitting on he was a member of the Nuremberg tribunal.
It is truly
It's like,
amazing.
what?
It's truly amazing, and I think as someone once said, denial's not a river in Egypt. I think these guys, if they believed they were helping the United States, they were completely deluded, in my opinion, as to what the United States was supposed to be about. And the sound you're hearing is the founding fathers like spinning in their graves about this stuff, because
Or Hippocrates.
it's like a giant puzzle, how the CIA, which is all over this stuff, it's an extra constitutional organization. It's not in the Constitution of the United States. And yet they accrued tremendous power. I mean, you dig into the history of this, it sounds so crazy that it's unbelievable. So when the war ended, what the CIA did under Allen Dulles was to take the German, essentially secret police, and have them be our contacts in Europe. So what was happening was President Truman is getting a report from the German secret police on what was happening. And that fostered some of the Cold War conflict with the Soviet Union, because they were filtering, the stuff that came in. Now, without getting into a whole, we could do a couple of days talking about this. The idea that somehow we wanted to gather this information using these horrendous techniques is it's shocking but not surprising, I guess would be the way I would say it.
What do you think about the ones that supposedly, or there's controversy over the success cases? I mean, not just the Ted Kaczynskis or the uh, Frank Olson case. A lot of people said he was programmed to throw himself out that window. Ted Kaczynski, he was programmed to make these bombs, um, and I think they confused the Korean War prisoners, the ones that the U.S. eventually, I don't know, liberated or agreed to their release. They didn't want to come back.
Yeah.
It's like Stockholm syndrome on acid, pun intended. Checkmate, triple word score.
There you go. Well, the thing of it is, you said, well, you have these cases like Frank Olson. Yeah, a little subtle mind programming there. You have these cases like Frank Olson, and they're egregious. And manic motorcycle, manic mechanic. Oh, yes. You know what I could really go for is a motorcycle ride.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay.
3 of them.
Okay.
I think
There's this little thing in medicine that we seem to have ignored, kind of like the prime directive in Star Trek. It's do no harm.
Well,
what happened to do no harm?
It's worse, because what you're talking about is the hypocritical oath here. And one of the 4 cornerstones of medicine, one of which is do no harm. More important than even do no harm is the principle of autonomy. And that is, no one has any right to force any treatment or affliction. I mean, you can't inject syphilis without somebody's informed consent. That's why I said Hippocrates would be rolling over in his grave to know that this was done unwittingly on the subjects, because it is one of the cornerstones, one of the 4 cornerstones, in addition to do no harm, is that principle of autonomy. And that was thrown right out the window. It wasn't even considered, which is startling to me, because I assumed that the lack, when I took the Hippocratic Oath in medical school, and I watched all my colleagues go through that, For me, it was a sacred experience. Um, yeah, it says a lot, but basically, you don't you if you misuse this information, you don't deserve to have it, and you've only seen farther because you've stood on the shoulders of giants. I mean, to me, it was like I'm not into like the Illuminati and the Masons and all that, but to me, that was the medical equivalent of it. This is sacred knowledge that's taken thousands of years to accumulate. Don't screw it up, kind
I
of
don't
thing.
think that's an opinion. I think it's a fact. And anybody who doesn't take it as sacred is really not looking carefully enough because it is sacred.
And I feel like that's a artifact or problem of modern times, like the last 20, 30 years, like, yeah, 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 okay.
How about the last year? I
But
mean,
this was going on in the 50s.
no, no, but I mean, if you think that this has ended, maybe surreptitious giving people LSD has. And by the way, once again, LSD is sort of the great psychotropic medication that's been lost to us because of this crap. I mean, they were using low dose LSD in the late 50s and early 60s, and they got great results in reducing anxiety about death and in working with
Alcoholism.
alcoholics. I mean, and Albert Hoffman, who the creator of LSD, said, "Well, this is my problem child." The bottom line is that autonomy thing that you're talking about. Well, line up for your digital vaccination passport. I mean, we are going down this road at breakneck speed. And what Goering said at the Nuremberg trials, and he was, a big shot in Nazi Germany, it wasn't the Germans, it was fear. You can do this anywhere. And the Milgram experiments, which
Hmm.
is we do what we're told. Anybody who hasn't researched the Milgram experiments, you got to do it. He wanted to prove that the Germans were different, and he found that everybody would he found Yale University students and faculty were subject to the same thing. When somebody told them turn up the shock to the point where the person is screaming, they might protest, but they still did it. It was incredible. The bottom line is in all this for our wonderful viewers who are interested in non-ordinary mind is open your mind to non-ordinary. This is an exploration of human consciousness, human potential, and we have the potential to be good and maybe not so good.
Yeah, I think we've always had that potential, but now with technology and resources, we have a capacity to do infinitely more harm. And I mean, the House of Cards eventually did come down. Like you said, the bulk of the records were destroyed. And these were over 200 sites or something like that. This was a huge program. It was done in a very short amount of time. 10 years is pretty staggering. How much data and damage was done in those 10 years. But what happened is those records were ordered destroyed. Like you said, some were misfiled. And I think about 30,000 papers were recovered after 1977, and they were gone through. And if you want more information on the content of that sliver of records that survived, there was a Canadian news program in the 1980s called The Fifth Estate, which I think was a documentary, but they did talk a lot about what was in those files, and then of course, of all of the patients that were still alive and knew that they were drugged, because many never knew, ended up suing the CIA for damages, and then of course, like what we talked about before, we're given compensation, which is essentially an admittance of guilt. So a lot of people think this was a hypothetical program and it's conspiracy, and this is why this program was important, I think, to us, so that people realize, well, no, this was a real thing. Times were so radically different that it's hard to imagine something like that occurring, much like the Tuskegee, much like Nazis invasions.
Not
But
hard for
that it was a
me.
different world.
I don't know, Mark. You're a lot kinder about this than I am. I think it's still happening. I think they changed the name,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and they do it under different auspices. Um, but the idea that autonomy, do no harm, is at the forefront of how we operate is kind of a joke today. we believe in a one size fits all everything. That's where we're heading, that we are bound to algorithms. And while I think that the technology is in many ways beautiful, I don't want to be run by it.
Mhm.
And I think that you know, all these drugs that they were using, the hypnotic techniques, the torture, literally torture for mind control, um, it's technology. Technology is not just that we can do something on computer. Technology is a way of doing things. And we have to be careful because there's nothing as closed as a closed mind that thinks it's open. And I'm hoping that people will do their homework on this. You know, we're touching these different topics not because we are experts at every one of them, because we're curious and interested in expanding our awareness, expanding the awareness of our potentials, you know, because the mind is the builder. The mind is what's going to I think it was it Henry Ford who said anybody who thinks he can or thinks he can't is right, you
There are
know?
two types of people: those who think they can and those who think they cannot, and they're both right.
Yeah, okay, so you got the quote better than I. Um, that's our experience. But the idea that human consciousness goes way beyond our ordinary way of thinking, that's a fact to us because we encounter it every day.
Well,
We,
that's why cases like Frank Olson, I think, are so important because it illustrates everything that you just said there. You know, was this a poorly designed experiment that went bad, that took a guy with pre existing suicidal thinking and magnified it with LSD and then he killed himself? Or, like the autopsy showed, was this a homicide, an attempt to cover up a guy who was now loosey goosey because they fried his brain or whatever? And the United States government is concerned that, you know, he may release secrets. He was an army biochemist. He was a biologic weapons researcher and expert. He could have been quite damaging if he didn't hold his neurons in a compliant state. And he definitely took a 13-story nosedive. And it's a mystique about, was this mind control? Was this government cover up? Was this bad experiment?
well,
We
if
may
you
never
look,
know.
okay, you did mention something I think significant that I lived during the era when LSD was first when it was legal, and then when it became anathema. Okay, there were people who were you know, if 2 aspirin is good, 200 might not be quite as good. People were taking unbelievably high doses of this stuff and doing nosedives out of windows. And psychedelics, which in certain cultures are sacraments.
Right.
Psychedelics became this dangerous thing.
Sure.
And anything is dangerous if not used appropriately.
Right.
Okay.
Even
But
water.
yeah, well, ask the people who are waterboarded about that. Um, you know, so the idea that this is powerful and we've used it in our society to hurt people. I mean, you know, I'm just going to be real simplistic. You can use it to heal, you can use it to hurt. I mean, surgery. Give a mugger a surgeon's scalpel. They can do quite a job on you, you know. Um, anything with power has power to heal or hurt, depending on how you use the power. This stuff is powerful.
Yeah, it's nuclear energy versus nuclear weaponry.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, the idea is that people, ordinary people, became experiments, and that anybody who doesn't want to look at this idea, especially in the context of where we are presently, that maybe not everybody has our best interests at heart, and maybe we ought to do our own homework, and maybe we ought to be able to have an open discussion where sunlight becomes the best disinfectant. if we can't do that, we're doomed to repeat this,
Yeah.
and
Be on guard, be alert for
well,
stuff like that.
ask questions.
Ask questions. Yeah.
Hold our authorities accountable. The pharmaceutical companies were up to their eyeballs in this stuff. And these
Well,
are
Sandoz made it.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
these are the corporations that we're pouring billions of dollars into to come up with some life-saving vaccines now. The history is not so good.
No, I mean, and the problem with LSD is it's odorless and tasteless, and it could be in my tea right now. And the only way that you would really know is if you drank it and then started experiencing unusual imagery.
Like if you saw the word love everywhere. I mean, maybe you could
I'm freaking out.
love, love, love.
Oh God,
Where
what
the
happened? I
hat.
blacked out. Is the show over?
This is a good message to send out into the world.
Is the show over? What happened?
No, I was just promoting love. And where's my whole cup? What did I do with my shameless promotional cup?
What are we going to do next week? I love this program. I love this show, and I love our one viewer. Thanks, Mom. Here's looking at you.
Hey, wait a minute. Oh, wait, no, well, we have one at least. I don't know, Mark, what did we decide about next week? I don't remember.
It was a secret.
Okay.
No, it'll be a surprise. It's another tactic.
It's a frustration. It's a hypnosis thing.
I had a patient offer me a suggestion for next week, and I'm going to do a little pre-research on it and see if we can put it together for next week. If not, it'll be our original scheduled programming, and we may do it the following week. So it's a surprise. Why don't you leave some comments down below on what you want us to research and talk about? Click and clack here.
Non-ordinary mind. That's us.
Yeah, there's definitely nothing non-ordinary here.
Well, that was fun, Mark. We could go for quite a number of hours on this, but I think hopefully we opened a few people's eyes.
I think so too, and I'm looking forward to next week. So I guess that's all we got. And until then,
be well. Hey, that was close.